He said, "You sold the Avro RJ to Northwest?" And I said, "Well, yes." He said, "If you can sell that airplane to Northwest, you can sell any Airbus airplane."
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, is Garrick Deschavon of Collateral Verifications for episode 21. Time on Wing is now officially old enough to drink. Garrick, who is joining us for our 21st episode?
It is Friday after all, right? So we have...
It's 8 a.m. on a Friday.
Well, I mean...
It's 5.
What's it saying? Is it 5 o'clock somewhere? I don't know. It's brunch hour. Like, come on, we're almost there. Not to say that we drink heavily on a regular basis, but
not to say we don't.
Once in a while. Not to say we don't either. That's right. We have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Jones today, which you know him quite well, and I've met him as well. He's a delightful gentleman that has a great career in aviation. So Chris is the Chief Commercial Officer at Aero Design Labs, and so we will hear all about that, which I'm looking forward to that. But he has also had an illustrious career with some of the OEMs. He worked as SVP of Sales and Marketing for Airbus. He was also VP of Sales at Bombardier. He actually had 2 stints at Airbus in North America, one as VP of Sales, VP Marketing, Sales Director, and then also the SVP Sales and Marketing. And he had also started his career with BAE Systems as a sales director, doing senior marketing analyst and marketing out. So he's been doing a lot of stuff with sales and marketing. So Chris, this is your time on Wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show. And frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well. And you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on the metals. So anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you. And we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Chris, thanks for being on the show today with us. We certainly enjoyed talking to you in the past, and so we're looking forward to a great discussion today. One of the things that I always asked our guests to start us off is how you got into aviation. I think everybody's got a different past and different experiences, and so we'd love to hear from you in terms of where the bug came from and where it all started. So have at it.
Absolutely. So thank you first for having me on the podcast. Well, our friendships go back a long way, especially with Courtney in a previous incarnation of work and subsequent to that. So it's great to be on the podcast. I've followed it, and you have a lot of fun. So thank you for having me on. So where I got started, my father was an aerospace engineer, and he worked for British Aerospace. He lived in North Wales, and at the age of 16, he moved down to Hatfield in England, which is just north of London. And that at the time was a big move for him to make, moving away from his family and the family business that they had at the time. They were in dairy farming. And so he went down to Hatfield and started as an apprentice. And so he was a design engineer on the BA 146. And we would go, I must have been 5 or 6 years old, the first open day that I went to. And so we'd go to the factory, and you'd tour the factory. And so you'd hear the press machines going. And I just remember the intensity of noise that would be going on the final assembly line, from rivet machines to these enormous stamping presses that would just come down with this sheer velocity with a great thud. And they would suddenly be making these door surrounds and various shapes that went onto the aircraft. And so you had sort of this cacophony of noise and sort of just this great experience on the final assembly line. And then you'd go out and you'd watch a flying display that had historical aircraft. So you'd have the Spitfire and the Hurricane and the Mosquito that was designed and built locally that would fly over. And then you'd have the BAE 146 that would fly when that came out. And my father was on the wheels, tires, and brakes design for the aircraft. And I remember when the first aircraft, the initial prototype aircraft, flew by, I looked up and I exclaimed, "Dad, that's the aircraft that you designed." And he turned around and was very, very embarrassed because we're out on the flight display and there's hundreds of people around. And of course, they all turn to Dad thinking that he's the chief designer of the aircraft. And so I really embarrassed him, poor guy. But it was a very proud moment for British Aerospace to see the first aircraft fly by, and its registration was G-SH because it was the whisper jet, and it was extremely quiet because it had 4 very small engines on. But I remember that aircraft flying by was a proud moment, and then it would be followed by the Harrier. And of course, the Harrier was a marvel of noise and maneuverability. And so it would approach the assembled audience, and it would go to the left, it would go to the right, then it would hover, and then it would do a bow, and then it would just go off. And how can you not be impressed by that as a kid?
Yeah.
But I think what I really connected with was not necessarily the marvel of designing and building aircraft, it was the sense of purpose around travel. And I was born in a town called Dunstable, which is not far from Luton. And so you have Luton Airport, which, if you lived in England, was a bit of a cliche about Luton Airport. There was a song about it. But it gave me the opportunity to watch aircraft coming and going. And my sister and I, as soon as she could drive, we would go up to the airport and we would go into the terminal in the evening because we knew you could get a cup of tea or whatever. And we would look up at the departures board and just see where people were going. And I had a great sense of just a purpose around travel. And you start to wonder, and I still do, when I see a jet fly overhead at 35,000 feet, I wonder where people are going and what they're doing. Are they going for a vacation? Are they going for a business trip? Are they going to see friends, loved ones? They might even be going for to see sick relatives or whatever. But everyone on board an aircraft has a purpose. They're going somewhere. People don't just jump on a plane and say, "I'm going to go for a ride." So I'm still enamored with the sense of that. Some do. Courtney might.
Yeah, there's some weirdos out there.
No, they used to pay me to go for airplane rides to take people on airplane rides. Now I can't.
No, that's right. Now they tell you they kick you out of the airplane. It's like, no, we told you you can't come back.
Yeah. Courtney up front, no.
Yeah, sir, could you please stop kicking the seat? I get that.
Yeah. So I got I guess my entry was it was the foundation was around my father, and then just going through the whole transportation experience. I ended up taking my second job when I was 16 was working in a travel agent. And that was extremely fun because it was back in the old days when somebody would come in and say, "I need to book a flight from Heathrow to Athens." And so you would write it all out, and then you'd get on the phone and you would talk to somebody on the other end, and you'd have a real ticket and you'd hand it to somebody, and then they'd go and get their foreign currency at the foreign currency exchange. And there was a huge amount of romance about travel back then. So we didn't sort of have that digital sort of disconnection. You had to go to a travel agent to book a trip. And so that really sort of filled in my love for aviation and transportation.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great story. That's great. I mean, it's got to be fascinating as a kid to go into, where they actually make airplanes. Yeah. That's really cool, right? You get that feel right there of like, oh, this is how the magic's made. Very cool.
Absolutely. And I still do. Any assembly line I've been to, I just marvel in how it comes together, how people are just working on a technological advancement that brings so much to people and communities, and just drives commerce. And you just realize that there's a lot that goes into it, and then there's a lot that comes out of it at the same time.
Yeah. Now, is that what drove you to wanting to work for manufacturers, right? Because you have pretty extensive experience working for manufacturers. So is that kind of what drove that, or that was just kind of how it happened?
Well, no, because I wanted to go into banking originally, and I'm glad I didn't, because I would have been a miserable failure at banking. It's not my personality. So my dad pointed out to me that if I applied to college, British Aerospace would provide a commercial apprenticeship, and around that commercial apprenticeship was a program that in your summers you would work for British Aerospace. And I did a commercial apprenticeship. And so what they would do is they would move me around different parts of the commercial aspects of the company. So procurement, accounting, marketing, contracts, sales. And I managed to have insight to more of the elements that spoke to me on the commercial side. I knew I wasn't an engineer. I didn't realize I wasn't a banker, but this kind of opened up an opportunity that would give me a guaranteed summer job. They'd pay for my books. And after graduating, they had a 2-year program where you could, where you did more of the rotations. But then the last 6 months of your apprenticeship, you really focused down the area where you thought you wanted to go in for your full-time job. And that's actually how I ended up coming to the US, is British Aerospace sent me to Washington, where BAE had their sales, marketing, commercial, and support headquarters. And at the time, they were selling 40% of their products into North America. So it was the Jetstream products, the ATP that came along, the BAE 146 that became the Avro RJ. And I wanted to travel. And I said, look, I'd like to go to the US. And they said, can't be done. You're an apprentice. We don't have the budget. But I pressed the system and I persevered, and I said, look, I'll set up my visa, I'll do whatever I need to do, but this is really what I'd like to do. And so they sent me to the US for 6 months, and I was offered a job after 3 months. And that's sort of how that part rolled out for me for launching my career, really in aviation and in the US. But I was still a reluctant participant, I think because my perception and my sort of introduction to British Aerospace was around the manufacturing and engineering side. But what I didn't realize is there was this incredibly exciting role of the commercial group that went out and sold and marketed and told people why they wanted the product, why it would be more profitable, and why it was better than the competition. And so I kind of marveled in this realm of trying to build a case as to why it would work for the carrier. And so there's a lot of intrigue around that. And then one of my rotations in the summer was in the contracts department. And so they gave me a thick contract to read, which I wasn't really interested in. But what I was intrigued by was the fact that people would disappear for 2 to 3 months at a time. So they'd go off to Africa, and then they would go off to somewhere in Europe, and then they would come back and they would have a deal. And there was this great fanfare and excitement or a mystery around people traveling and getting these big deals done. And so that really tickled me, and that was where I started to get really intrigued as to where I wanted to be.
So you're an apprentice and still in school at the same time during this period, is that right?
Yeah, up until the last 2 years. So I did the rotation after I graduated from university, and then the last part was coming over to the US, and it was still, I was in the last 6 months of my apprenticeship when I went over to the US, and then they were quite happy, they being headquarters, that I'd found a job, because it's a successful conclusion to an apprenticeship. So it really, and I think they're also proud about people succeeding in the commercial realm, because the traditional, I'd say, typecast of an apprentice is generally a technical side, and people go into be electricians or however whatever path they end up choosing. And so for me to do that on the commercial side, I think was it's a smaller population of people that do the commercial apprenticeships, but I think it has incredible value to people who, frankly, don't know what they want to do. They know what they're connected with, but then you get this holistic view of how the business sort of works. And then you kind of figure out, it's a little bit like playing in a big sandbox where you don't have any responsibility and you can say, I'm going to try out all the apparatus and see what actually sticks and what really speaks to me in terms of what I want to do when I think I grow up.
And so what role did you then slot into in the US? So this is like when you were officially hired. Did you start in contracts? Is that where you started?
No, I started off as a market analyst. And so my job was, we worked closely with the tech sales group. And the tech sales group were the people that did the aircraft performance and economic side of things. And on the market analyst side, we would either look at business plans for startup airlines and figure out, how they were going to make money and look to the revenue side of things. And we pulled Form 41 data and O&D data off CDs and started to pull sort of the market-driven side of things. Yeah, remember those?
Oh, yeah.
CDs, yeah.
I remember Form 41 coming on CDs, yeah.
Yeah. So we used to pull that data, and we started to do, it really gave me the foundation of, you start looking at RPMs, ASMs, load factor, yield, and what's driving the business side of the market. And then how you slot your aircraft in to meet the demand and the variability of demand and which size and what frequency. And that really gave me a solid understanding of what drives markets. And we had everything from the 19-seat Jetstream 31 up to the 110-seat Avro RJ. And so we kind of straddled, we're on the regional space, but we almost straddled a little bit of the larger network carrier side of things. And so it gave me a great exposure. And I learned a lot about analytics and regression analysis and demand forecasting. And I was very lucky to have a mentor at the time who took me under his wing and just sat me down, and we would spend evenings learning about the industry and just this great curiosity around how can we do this differently. And I think the foundation I learned with British Aerospace was, and at that point in time, there were 5 different manufacturers in that segment. You had Saab, you had Embraer, you had Dornier, you had British Aerospace, you had Fokker. And so there were so many different players in that segment. Fairchild was another one. So they had the Metro, the 19-seat Metro.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. I want to go through this list. So there was British Aerospace, there was Fokker, there was Fairchild, the Metro.
Dornier.
There was Saab, there was Dornier.
Yep, Saab.
Which are we missing any?
De Havilland.
There's de Havilland.
Oh, those guys.
ATR was around at that time, right?
ATR. Yeah,
the ATR would they have been around?
ATR was there around that time as well. Yeah,
yeah. It was a crowded space, right? And there's nothing now. Like that.
That's the crazy part.
That's fascinating. And did we mention Saab? Right, they were in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
It was a crowded space, which meant you had to be more creative. And to me, the value cell was a distinguishing feature, and it was the way to embed yourself closer to the airline and the way the airline thinks, which then builds the story inside the airline that is the foundation of the sales campaign. And so I learned to connect with the network planners and the performance team in the airline using real metrics and data that they understood, so that when you go into the C-suite and you're giving a pitch, it's all cross-checked with the airline. And so you're kind of building a credible platform on which to try and sell your product, rather than just going in with hey, we've got this product and we've sold it to X, Y, and Z. It's the extra mile that says, this will drive your profitability for the following reasons. And being able to speak their language and identify with the enablers that they are looking for in their business to invest. But it just was there was no, there were very little pro formas for how you did a campaign. It was all, I felt like we were creating stories on every different feature of the aircraft that we thought was better than the other five. And so it was complex, but it was fun. And it was, I wouldn't say there wasn't any pressure, because there was, but there's a lot less pressure than you find in a duopoly, because the expectations in a duopoly are that you win. The expectations when you're one of five is give it your best shot, and it would be great if we could produce something. But it was a different dynamic. So it was a dynamic that we could create ideas and sort of philosophies and ways to present. And I learned a lot about going deeper with British Aerospace. And I think that's something that stayed with me in terms of earning your seat at the table when you're putting a product in front of somebody. You don't earn that place unless you've really done your homework and you're bringing value. And that's what I've tried to instill with all of the people I've worked with and led and coached, which is, don't just put a slide up. What's the one takeaway for every slide? And if you have to repeat it at the bottom, repeat it, but make sure that they're getting value in every slide.
I got to say, the final piece of Chris Jones just kind of clicked into place for me. I knew that you, obviously the British Aerospace background, but I knew you had some sort of marketing background, but I never really put the two and two together that you did all those same things. And I have to say, all of those times that we were just so impressed, like, wow, like Chris really gets this stuff. Yeah, now I see why. It's less impressive. Like, you actually did this. Like, this wasn't a thing like wow, a sales guy really gets this. That's so impressive. Nah, you're an old marketing guy. You weren't a new sales guy. No, but that really, it actually does really click into place, right? Because that's a lot of it's a lot of why I really enjoyed working with you. But doing a lot of those, the very same thing, kind of that sense of discovery, the sense of yeah, I guess it's that, if you have, for me, that mentor was Jerome Chung. Right. I'll never forget. I went to him one day and I said, hey, I think I have an idea. He said, okay, good. Go talk to an airline. I said, don't you want to see it? He goes, I don't care. Do you think it's good? Yeah. It's okay. Book flight. And it was just that sense of discovery.
Right? Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. No, wow. It's funny you mentioned sales because I didn't want to go into sales. I was offered a job to move from marketing into sales, and I said, I don't want to do it. It just had an image for me, which is very cliche, which is you're taking people out for lunch, and you're just sort of you're waiting for the real people to come in. And I felt like I was one of the real people because I delivered value with my messaging. But then I realized that sales is what you make it, and it's a you can own that space, and you can own it better if you've got messages that you have conviction behind because you understand the numbers. And I think that everyone who's in front of a customer should have conviction beyond just reading something. They need to believe the numbers make sense, and then you sell with passion. It's different.
Yeah. And do you feel that it's obviously having worked, kind of through different organizations, do you feel that the younger generations that are looking to get into marketing or sales or get that? Do you think that they, or is there something that's lacking? Because I sometimes you feel like, people just kind of go in and go, well, especially in today's environment, it's kind of like, well, it's product A or product B, right? And so how much work do I really need to do? It's just kind of like, you go out there and be like, this is what we do best. And, do you want to take some?
I think it comes down to leadership. And I think it's how you select the people. And the job interview process, you hope, is always robust and thorough. But I think you need to ask those questions, which is, how do you build your story? Do you understand the basic elements of the business and what's driving customer reaction? And are all customers equal? And you can filter out people who really get it by the way they sort of navigate their way through those questions and the way they come forward in presenting the responses. And I think this explains why people don't suddenly come into the industry from outside of the industry at a more senior level, because if you haven't had that foundation, it's very hard to bring somebody in from outside the business and say, you're going to sell a commercial aircraft and you've got the best team available. You lose that thought pattern. And I think you have to embed it right in at the very bottom level, and not just teach people how it works, but they have to go out, and to Courtney's point, you've got to go and talk to a customer, and you need to find out from the customer what their needs are today and anticipate what they will be in the future, and deliver those thought-provoking messages that give an airline room to ponder and say, yeah, okay, maybe things will be different, and yes, maybe we can open up these 5 new routes that you've identified. Beyond just saying the aircraft goes from A to B and it burns less fuel than the competition. It's like, okay, what are the distinguishing facets? And keep digging and keep churning and keep driving the value of that one seat and the engine reliability, and digging into owning the relationship with the engine manufacturer, because you know what the engine manufacturer's contribution does to the value of that extra seat that you're able to carry on the hot day out of Denver, whatever it is. So you need to be very curious, and keep digging down with different layers of curiosity, and then build your story and build it around the customer.
Okay, I want to put Chris on the spot. I said we weren't going to do this, like, explicitly before we started recording, and I'm throwing it all out.
Here we go. Plot twist.
I want to know. Sell to me a British aerospace product. Like, how would you do it? Give me the pitch. Why were the British aerospace products of the time better? Let's give it the North American context. I want to know, like, back then, like, how would you do it?
So it wasn't easy, Courtney, but I can tell you which ones I sold. I sold 36 Avro RJs to Northwest Airlines.
Oh yeah, those hung around for a long time.
They hung around for a long time, and the reason the aircraft worked for Northwest is that it performed out of Aspen. Mm-hmm. And Aspen, at that point, well, John Dasberg had a house in Aspen, but it was a unique market, and we managed to find other unique markets where 4 engines actually produced revenue and value in a network carrier environment, because you could take a first-class seat into Aspen on an aircraft that was offering closer to regional jet economics. I say closer to because it was still a 4-engine jet. But the yield that they could benefit from driving that first-class seat through their network, that was the differentiator, and the F100 couldn't deliver in that market. It was either a 757 or an Avro RJ, and there was a window in the scope clause that allowed Northwest to have 36 69-seat aircraft. So they configured an 85-seat aircraft for 69 seats, but the value that they were generating from the first-class section offset the seats that they weren't able to carry as a max capacity aircraft. So it was
goes back to the scope clause. Always goes back to the scope clause.
Always goes back to scope.
Air Wisconsin had.
Yep.
I think they were 146s technically.
They were 146.
Yeah, yes. Scope clause.
Yes. Yep. So
very cool.
It wasn't one size fits all, and the F100 had the edge as a twin jet, and the 146 had with the Lycoming 502 engine, didn't have a stellar reputation, and so you had to find that bandwidth of value, and it wasn't ubiquitous. It was never going to be a really big North American aircraft, but it would be a niche aircraft that delivered unique value.
I think one of the most fascinating things about that airplane, you mentioned Aspen, but one of the most fascinating things about that airplane from a sales perspective, as we were looking at it years later, like way later, I mean, like decades later, Chris, why did that airplane sell? And somebody said something to me that the light switch clicked on, the light clicked on. They said, well, think about Aspen. And they said, what's the single engine performance out of Aspen? And they said, there is no such thing. It's engine out performance. That's very different for a 4-engine 146 than a 2-engine F100. Right.
Yes.
So we think of it in terms of, single engine. It's not. It's if you lose one, which makes sense, right, from the regulatory standards. But that's a complete game changer in a restricted airport such as Aspen. High yield, right? That's fascinating.
Yes.
And then I have one other question for you. I know you know the real answer, but I'm looking for the market answer as well.
The fake answer?
Yeah, the fake answer.
Okay.
Why did they put 4 engines on that thing?
Oh, well, well, because they couldn't fit 6. That's the joke, right?
That's a fake one.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So BAE was bring another engine.
Bring another engine. That's right.
Bring another engine.
So not to belittle the 4-engine regional jet, but when I went for my interview at Airbus in 1998, I interviewed with Henri Corpron, and he said to me, "So tell me about your background." And he looked at my resume and he said, "Stop." He said, "You sold the Avro RJ to Northwest?" And I said, "Well, yes, I was the sales director on the account." And he said, "If you can sell that airplane to Northwest, you can sell any Airbus airplane."
That's so Henry, right? Because they had closed the 320 deal.
Done.
It's a great selling point, right? Yeah.
Okay, so the transition then from British Aerospace, did you go directly from BAE to Airbus?
Yes. In fact, their offices were 3 miles apart, which was quite convenient. And stepping into the door at Airbus was absolutely eye-opening because that's when I realized the gravity of the Airbus role, which is you're expected to win. This is how we show up, and it was quite different. And I sat in my first commercial meeting, and we had sales, marketing, contracts, finance, legal, and support, and a very large meeting. And they're talking about Air Canada, American Airlines, FedEx, and I just suddenly realized, okay, we're in the big leagues now. It's all supersized. And so I almost had that slightly childlike, giddy, eyes wide open excitement, which was, okay, here we go. And then my first account that I got was FedEx. And Courtney, I'm going back to what your mentor, Eric Chung, told you was go talk to the airline. I asked, okay, where am I getting my where's my training? What are you going to do to bring me up to speed? And the response was, go down and visit FedEx. And FedEx took me to Toulouse. And they introduced me around all of the relevant functions that they interact with. And
within your own company?
Within my own company. So they gave me the customer view of who was important and relevant in the company, which was helpful. But my first real business trip was going to Nice. And I went with FedEx to Nice, and we'd sat in a hotel there, and there was a big graphic put up of this sort of egg-shaped cross-section with 2 decks, and it was called the A3XX. And this was the focus group for what would become the A380 freighter. And it just...
He has it
right there.
Eyes,
See? That's it.
My eyes were like this. It was just...
Garrick's screen is fuzzy. He's a fuzzy kind of guy.
Man.
But what you can't see behind him on the top shelf there, can you...
It's my... Oh, hold on. See if I can get it.
A thing of beauty. It's not... It's even though it's fuzzy, it's not a 146. It's a FedEx A380 freighter.
Yeah.
Love it.
Wow.
I love it.
That was... I won this at a UBS event where they were... It was one of the giveaways. I know. Yes. Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
That's great. Yeah, so I literally was part of the focus group meeting as we started talking about the freighter, and we had the leading freight companies around the world all present at the meeting, and just looking at systems, power drive units, environmental control on board, loadability challenges for upper deck and main deck, and CG limits and floor loading, and it was just absolutely fascinating and a new area for me in freighters, because the BA 146 had some freight aircraft with TNT, but that was a market that we weren't involved with in North America. So getting into the freight world and just seeing how integrators use an aircraft as part of their network, and the 380 at its time was pipeline capacity, right? It's the largest aircraft able to go between the main points of activity, and being able to have later cutoff times out of Asia going into Memphis or into Anchorage was all just, it was, that to me was another great learning experience. I understood, or I thought I had a good insight into passenger metrics, and now I was moving into a new realm with the freight carriers. And my first visit down to Memphis was they used to do a management push for the peak season, where management would go down and invite key vendors in to help with the sort for the 2 weeks leading up to Christmas. And you just volunteered and you went down onto the line, and you'd see all the packages come down that were offloading for the aircraft or from the aircraft, and you'd flip them over, you'd scan the barcode, and off they would go. And it's all now fully automated. But at that time, you had that one last part where you just flip it, and if the barcode didn't scan, you'd type it in. But what I witnessed was commerce moving, and you could tell which aircraft came in because the motor parts were coming in. So like, oh, that flight came from Detroit. Pineapples and flowers came in, so pineapples were coming from Hawaii, and you could just start to, you could see commerce being moved through this giant hub and being distributed out on trucks to go and visit, to go and be delivered to people who had ordered things. And it was fascinating just seeing commerce move on freighters versus a commodity of passengers moving around, and that really was something I enjoyed.
So you worked the sort in Memphis.
We did. We worked the sort, yeah. And then 9/11 came along. So I joined Airbus in 98. And then after 9/11, of course, they clamped down on the security there. But yeah, it was a great thing because you'd go in at night and you'd work until the early morning on the sort, and then we'd go and grab breakfast and go and grab some sleep. But it was great because from the FedEx side, they got labor, but they brought the customer in as well to understand and watch and be part of the movement of their packages. And it was a great team bonding experience as well. You got the chance to work with your customer, and it was great. It was fabulous. I wish they would do it again, because I would volunteer in a heartbeat.
For great. Anybody who has not experienced an express sort in the evening on a weekday, you need to do it. It's especially if you're in aviation, have anything to do with selling aircraft or moving aircraft or the aircraft market on the freighter side, especially on the express. When I joined DHL, I think one of the things they told me was, so the thing about these airplanes is the revenue doesn't walk itself off. And I said, that's kind of silly, but that's everything we did.
Mm-hmm.
The sort, the GSE, to get the containers, to the sort, and then how do we tear down those containers? How do we sort them? The letter, the conveyables, and then the non-conveyable material. This is just forklifted around, and I learned so much about just anything to do with airline operations by watching an express sort. Probably the single greatest, the most compressed amount of experience that I've ever gotten in like 1 8-hour session that I hardly remember because it's like 2 a.m. right?
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. We went up to Chicago with Atlas Air, and we were trying to debunk the mystery around the 10-foot pallet, because the 747 had a higher main deck loading door for a 10-foot pallet. And at Airbus, with the 380, we could only have an 8-foot tall pallet. And so we were challenging how often an 8-foot pallet or 10-foot pallet is actually employed, because it doesn't cross deck with any other aircraft type. So you'd have to tear it down and then repack it if you were going to cross deck a pallet. But we went to Chicago. We stood on an Atlas aircraft that had come in. It must have been 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we stood there with clipboards, and we were just literally watching the pallets coming off and just sort of like getting dimensions and things. I mean, the height was obvious, but we were also looking at what was being transported at the time. And I remember you saw a Victoria's Secret pallet would come off, and then you'd see a heavy pallet, which would be what they call dirty freight. So it's like the machinery that would be coming off an oil platform. And the outsized cargo, the animals. I mean, it was fascinating on the getting out of the integrator, the FedEx and UPS side of the world, and getting into real heavy cargo lift, and just how their movements are a little bit different. They have unique requirements for some of the items that they're carrying, including floor loading and maneuverability of the pallets on board, and it's really intriguing.
Okay, so what was 10 feet tall? Anything? I mean, what were the findings? I'm fascinated.
Nothing that I witnessed. And in fact, we argued as well that some of the aircraft had the nose loader, and the nose loader would flip up, but it's underneath the cockpit. So you can only load an 8-foot pallet through the nose door. So there were very few pallets. That's the short answer. Were 10 foot high, and most of them were sort of packed. They were either maxed out to the floor loading because they were heavy, and the voluminous pallets. Most of them are getting cross decked anyway, so it was seldom.
Yeah. Within my first week of joining DHL, I was given the task of they had a spare CF6 engine that needed to be moved across country. And they said, "Is it going to fit in the side of this?" It was a 762 freighter. And so I looked at the diameter. I looked at the diameter of the aircraft. We could center load. Yeah, awesome. Take it. And then somebody who is not they're more the mechanical engineer worked kind of actually loading and unloading aircraft. Looked at me and just kind of shook his head. He goes, "Nope, won't fit." And I'm like, I'm looking at the numbers. He said, "But you gotta get it in the door and then turn it." And sure enough,
right,
it wouldn't happen. I never would have thought of that. The diagonal and all these different angles. And here's somebody, I said, "How did you know that?" He goes, "Well, we tried it once."
You can do anything once.
Yeah. That's kind of cheating. Yeah. But just the things that you don't think about. And it's all, I mean, it's very automated. I don't mean to say that it's manual and there's a lot of automation, but when it comes down to those, like the 10-foot pallets, right? Like, can you turn an engine, get it in the side door and turn it? It just requires that nuance, that level of detail. That's fascinating. I don't get to talk freighters enough because, Garrick is an appraiser.
What does that mean?
He pointed straight to a freight aircraft.
I order stuff.
That's right.
I have boxes at my door every day. You are a
consumer.
Yeah, that's I drive my kids around. I drive freight around. That's doesn't that count? Doesn't count for something?
Sometimes you're the freight too.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes,
exactly. Yeah, the heavy freight. Yeah. So it's interesting. You mentioned the nose door, right? Because I think there was an article this week that made a comment about how maybe some customers are trying to see if Boeing will do a kind of a nose door on the 777 freighter, the 777-8. And it's one of those, I think it's such a unique, that's what makes the 747 so unique, right? Because it does allow you to carry, I think, certain material that no other airplane can do, right? But it's pretty niche, right? And so I think from that standpoint, I don't know if it's something that Boeing will probably entertain because it's only going to fit for less than a handful of clients, right? That'll probably fly it. But it also just kind of guarantees that the 747-8 freighters will probably fly forever. But it is interesting kind of how people think. They're just kind of like, oh, well, you should do this. Just like the 10-foot door. You need to have it for the 2 times that we might need it in the, lifetime of the airplane, right? Right. And that's kind of that thought process from the operator of, why they want certain airplanes is kind of like that. Well, just in case. the 99% of the time we won't need it. But that 1%, if we don't have it, somebody's going to be like, oh man, we should have gotten that.
Right.
And
That
that's, as an
1%
OEM,
matters.
I think that's, yeah, right. As an OEM, that's the challenge, right? Because then, and I think that's why ultimately you get to the, the marketing of like, okay, we're going to offer an airplane that is standardized and everybody's going to get the same. And then by the time the airplane launches, you're like, so what happened to that? Right.
Mhm.
That didn't come because everybody went, yeah, you know what? That's a great idea, but we really want it our way. And we want it
Right.
to do like this and that. So if we're going to be a launch customer, like we want that. And you're like, as an OEM, you go, okay, all right, fine. We'll do that just so we can sell more airplanes. But it's just, it's amazing, right? That thought process. And it goes back to understanding your customer, right? And that's what I'm getting out of this.
Yeah, no, it does. There's weight and complexity that comes with anything that you add onto an aircraft, as you know. And for that design, you're then imposing that structural weight on every other airline that's going to be flying that freighter. And so the trade-offs between what could you charter an aircraft to do that dirty freight versus and whether that customer is uniquely anchored around the need for a nose loader, there are alternatives. And so you have to, as an OEM, think about the long game, and you want your aircraft to be as homogeneous as possible. And you want to have as few unique features that don't have a payback on them. So it's that old adage with aircraft, which is wait, and wait, right? It's like what's the payback on carrying that excess structural weight and inspection requirements, and is a small segment of the market, and does that cost us the bigger portion of the market if we either go for it or don't do it?
Yeah. So even in this, just to play the thought experiment out, say, I don't know how you would nose load. It'd probably be a tail load. 777. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that would suggest either way, but you got to break that airplane in two to do it, and which I've done before in some programs. But clearly, you wouldn't have the mechanism if the freighter wouldn't have the nose loading. You wouldn't have the hydraulic pump or whatever to do it. But to Chris's point, you've got a provision for all of that, because manufacturing is key. Those provisions add weight, they add cost, they slightly, sub-optimize, de-optimize, whatever the word is, everything else for that one potential option. I think of the dual overwing exit on the 319 that I think was like an EasyJet only thing at the time.
It was, yeah.
And I that may have played out differently. That may have been solely on those. I don't think the provisions were necessarily there for a dual overwing on all of them, but you have to make that. You have to make that calculation, and then the program cost has to be borne in some deal somewhere. Right. And
yep.
That's usually why you don't see it go forward, Garrick, because what would you like? I would like this. Okay. Would you like to pay for it? No, I don't want to pay for it. Like that's universal across all industries, we're finding.
It is. And then you layer in the complexity of manufacture as well, which is you're now introducing another variant, which all those aircraft don't come down the line at one time. It's not that you suddenly stop and say, we're going to insert 100 EasyJet 319s with dual overwing exits. They get introduced sort of according to the number of aircraft that are going to be delivered, and it starts to add complexity. And OEMs try and shy away from complexity wherever possible. But if it turns the market, and if it brings in a significant customer order, and an EasyJet one was a significant order, then it was strategic at the time.
How big was that first order? Do you remember?
You're going to ask me that? No, not off the top of my head. I think it was
easy enough to find. I don't know either.
Yeah.
So I was going to say it brings up a great point about when you look at the OEM landscape today. I guess what do you think is missing, or what do you think the OEM should be doing? Because I mean, obviously, there's a lot of issues going on. Everybody's very busy with technical issues, supply chain, I mean, you name it, right? It's basically kind of trying to ramp up production. It's a challenge for everybody. So everybody's kind of in the same boat. But at the end of the day, you still need to move forward. And so having worked for various manufacturers and having that understanding of like, okay, what does it take to sell good products? Like, what do you see in the current landscape now that you're out of it that kind of makes you go, oh, you know what? They really should be focused on this, or are they going in the right direction? Or I don't know.
The question, what he's asking is, if I were in charge, I would. That's really
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
if I were king,
I would.
I would
I would aspire to. I think is the if I were in charge, because not all of these things are possible in today's environment. So I think what airlines want most is they want an aircraft that is going to be reliable. It's going to meet the economic objectives and the economic level of the level of economics that were expected when the business plan was built. But they want it on time. Nobody wants surprises, and so the aspirational thing is that you're delivering something that is on quality, that turns when you hit the ignition switch, that it's going to, the engines will start, they will run as long as you can, as long as you've hoped, and you think that the level of technology is delivering the economic benefit with the reliability expectations of the generation of aircraft that you're replacing. And so we're on that improvement curve for reliability of the new technology, but we're still a long way short of replacing a CFM56. The outgoing engine on a 737-800 is really the target for the MAX 8 or the 320 or the 321 Neo. You just want that level of reliability. And if you take out the engine reliability portion of it, we're now down to the predictability of when an aircraft is going to deliver, which is I've set my network around aircraft delivering in these months so I can hit my growth targets for the peak. And the OEMs don't, that it's not that the OEMs are holding information. A lot of this is just dynamic. And when I say it's dynamic, they're constantly chasing the issues that are affecting the delivery of aircraft. And it's deep into the supply chain. It's labor issues, it's quality issues, it's building at low volume levels. It's all of these complexities that were introduced through COVID will take some time to work out. And an airline just doesn't need surprises because they're building their business to it. So if I'm an airline CEO, I want to know if you're delivering a plan to me, even if it's a revised plan, that this is something I can build my business on. Because I've got my shareholders, I've got my passengers. I don't want to deliver a surprise when I do my next quarter's earnings report to Wall Street that I'm not saying, well, our capacity's down, we have poor reliability. They don't want to be blaming the aircraft. And right now, there are plenty of reasons why aircraft manufacturing is struggling. And the speed of delivering information from an OEM to a customer, by the time you sit down with a well-calibrated delivery forecast, which says this is the latest plan for your deliveries, in a lot of cases, that information is out of date because there are new issues that are affecting the supply chain from maybe a different sector, be it cabins or be it systems or seats or whatever. Those items pop up, and it's a little bit like playing whack-a-mole and just trying to keep everything flowing to a plan, and it's unreliable. So that's where the biggest struggle is. Now, once you've figured those portions out, which is I'm getting an aircraft that delivers to spec, it delivers the value that I expected, and I can build my forecast around this. The next paradigm is how do we get to net zero? And I think we all agree with net zero, we're a long way behind the curve. I mean, there's so many different predictions that are out there. So it would be net zero by 2040 or carbon neutral by 2050, whatever it is. We are behind that. And airlines and manufacturers and the infrastructure need to come together to deliver a product that is going to be game changing. And the game changing aspect is different today than it was when the Max and the Neo were launched. So the Max and the Neo were launched around 15% fuel burn reduction. It was based on economics versus the other aspects that we're now facing, which is climate change and sustainability. And the engine portion, so I was talking to John Slattery earlier this week, and the RISE project looks very promising, and it will deliver step change economics that will be superior to what was delivered from the LEAP program and the GTF. So you'll get a step change there, 15, 20%, closer to 20% improvement over today's engine technology, which is great. But that alone is not going to get us to where the industry needs to be. You need improvements in airframe design, and you see the blended wing. You look at the truss brace concept that Boeing's looking at. Those kind of enhancements need to work in concert with the engine technology and systems technology to deliver a real step change. And that's the point when Airbus and Boeing and any new entrants can enter the market, is when you've got a step change that is defendable for the next 30 years. Because you don't want to jump into something too soon and say first mover advantage, because that becomes first mover disadvantage. If 5 years from then, there's another enhancement that comes from airframe technology, different design or whatever, that now builds the next level of economics, and now you're looking at usurping the design that came 5 years before. So you have to time your entry into the market appropriately. But then on top of that, you've got the infrastructure that needs to move along with it. And whether that's the manufacturing of SAF and making sure that you're delivering in the quantities that need to be delivered to meet demand. But perhaps when you get into hydrogen, you have more pressure on infrastructure, which is how do I distribute and how do I change a lot of the fuel systems over to hydrogen, and how do I do that in multiple destinations so I'm not limiting the operability of an asset to a select number of airports. It needs to be well distributed to make it fit into an airline's operation. So it's going much deeper than just aircraft design. It's infrastructure design. It's how do you design gates at airports to fit aircraft with a blended wing that will have a wider wingspan than you had on a single-aisle aircraft, for example.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is you get step change economics, but the airports have to do their thing too to adapt. And so the impact of a new platform that really is going to be a step change, the whole industry has to move with this. It's not just aircraft design.
And how do you pick
that's what's
one?
fascinating around. How do you pick?
Well, I mean, Boeing, has, I don't want to say hinted, but I mean, they're very overt about, the testing they're doing on the trussed wing. Really interesting. Yep. There's Jet Zero with the blended wing. You've got Airbus with the hydrogen, right? So this seems like a very unique point in history where the next step, the spectrum of what's possible in the next step is so wide, and it can't be all of it, right? We can't implement, well, I don't know, I'm sure we can do a lot of things, but we can't implement all the infrastructure required for SAF and all the infrastructure required for hydrogen at the same time.
Yep.
Right? There's going to be, they're going to use there needs to be one direction, and nobody knows what direction that is yet. So which do you choose? And yes. Right now, you don't know that we're at this weird kind of no man's land where we're just kind of waiting for that technology to move forward, which really gets me to the work that you're doing now with Aero Design Labs.
Yes.
So just explain kind of what you're doing with Aero Design Labs and kind of the approach that you're taking there.
Absolutely. So we've just talked about paradigm change in aircraft design, and the time it's going to take to introduce that. Not to be overlooked, and perhaps a real opportunity for carbon reduction is improving what's in service today. And Aero Design Labs designs and certifies drag reduction kits for aircraft that are in service today. And we have an STC for the 737-700 and now for the 800. And the premise is we look for opportunities to reduce drag, which come now from areas of the aircraft that typically have not been, they've either been overlooked or could not be modeled before, because when these aircraft were designed, they were designed with earlier technology, which meant they didn't have the benefit of CAD. They didn't have the benefit of computational fluid dynamics, which only until recently, the application of CFD has been A, very expensive, and B, getting access to supercomputers to run CFD has been limited to sort of the very large OEMs. And so we will scan a model of an aircraft and build a digital map, a mesh of the whole aircraft, and look for areas of disrupted airflow as far upstream in the aircraft as possible. So with the 737, the most obvious area to start at is the wheel well, because they don't have the doors on the undercarriage. But it's actually just in front of that with the pack exhaust, where you've got this velocity of air that comes out in front of the wheel well. And so that's where we started to capture and solve for smoothing out airflow there. And then the objective is to flow that all the way back across the aircraft, across the fuselage, out to the tail section as smoothly as possible. And so it's a holistic aircraft approach, which hasn't been done before. And in terms of technology, it's probably the comparison is the impact that the winglets had for improvement in fuel burn reduction. We are perhaps the next biggest contribution to reducing fuel burn and carbon emissions than the winglets. We're not the same. We don't get the benefit of aircraft performance on airfield and climb performance, but in terms of cruise fuel burn, the reduction is somewhere in the order of 1.5 to 2% cruise fuel burn reduction, which is measurable. And that's the key here. A lot of airlines have been taking use of carbon offset programs. This is real tangible fuel burn reductions, which has A, a cost saving, and B, contributes to the reporting of sustainable metrics for reducing carbon. So we designed these kits for specific model type. The 737-800 is a variant now that is enjoying higher demand than it has done for a long period of time, either for airlines to bring them in to complement their fleet or to extend leases in what they have. And if you're able to save $100,000 a year per aircraft in fuel burn, or fuel cost reduction, it starts to become a natural hedge against higher fuel costs. And so it has multiple layers of benefit to an airline. And we think we've hit a sweet spot in the market because the pressure points come from the cost of fuel and the desire and the demand to reduce carbon emissions. And the demand comes from investors. It comes from corporate accounts. It comes from high carbon tax in Europe. And it's the topic of the day when there are all of these other opportunities to save carbon, but this is the most measurable way to do it. And I think we've got the 737-800 market. We're ready to hit that market. We've got the EASA STC application is pending there. So we'll be ready to hit the higher carbon tax region of Europe, which can save another $20,000 per year per aircraft just in carbon tax reduction from burning less fuel. So we'll start with the 737NG. We're looking at other platforms as well. We've scanned other model types. We're looking at those right now in our CFD models, which we start to iterate kit designs to look for how we can address the areas of disruption there. But we're doing it in a level of granularity that hasn't been seen before, and in a retroactive way, because the OEMs are looking forward. Airbus and Boeing are looking at what they can do for the next aircraft design and how they can build aircraft on time to the quality that airlines are looking for. We're able to look backwards and say, how do we improve areas that were overlooked before and build this cumulative benefit in an STC that delivers value for passenger and freight aircraft. So as aircraft are being converted from P to F, when they become the F, they're operating for another 10 years.
Right.
So if we can save 10 years worth of fuel, it's a very strong play, and it helps to decarbonize a small portion of benefit, but it all is cumulative.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm fascinated by this, and I know I've told you as much, Chris. But I do want to say, so I had somebody ask me recently. They said, "Hey, what's Chris doing?" I say he's with the Aero Design Labs. They do the drag reduction kits on the 737, and they said that sounds boring. I said, I know, right? Like, that's what's so great about it, right? This is where like the rubber actually meets the road, and the stuff are actually being done in the context of all the bright, shiny, really exciting things, hydrogen, not to say that those aren't important, but this is happening now and is tangible. Yeah. And there are other groups doing various types of things to save those couple points here and there. API Jet comes to mind. What you guys are doing with Aero Design Labs, right? Like, these are the responsible moves. Mm-hmm. Like you said, right? These are aircraft that, especially on the 800 side, will become freighters, and they'll fly forever and ever. So it's very likely, more a question of how the next generation comes along, but it's very likely that blended wing body aircraft will be flying right next to 737-800s with Aero Design Labs drag kits, right?
Yes.
For a decade or so. Sorry, Garrick, I cut you off there.
No, that's all right. I'll let Chris talk.
Well, and then I'll let you talk. We're not future-proofing aircraft, but we are taking one step forward. And to your point, there will be, even as newer technology delivers, and it's happening today, right? So the MAX and the NEOs are bringing 15% or more reduction in fuel burn, but they're also doing it at a slower pace than people had anticipated. Mm-hmm. And so 2 years ago, people would have said, hey, this doesn't necessarily make sense because I'm getting 50 of whatever, a NEO or a MAX next year. Well, people are starting to look at that and say, well, maybe I'm getting 25 to 30, and then it continues to stagger out to the right. And it's not that they changed their fleet plan, but they do change the lens that they're looking through when they're saying, there's pressure on sustainability. What do I do now to help bring a little bit more saving to the fleet that I will operate longer? And that's where it's helpful, and it takes a little bit of the bullseye off. Well, you're operating an old aircraft. Well, we're operating an older aircraft more efficiently. We're doing what we can. And by the way, these are the carbon savings per year. It's about 370 tons of carbon a year per aircraft. So it all adds up, and when you can get a payback on a kit that's under 3 years, it starts to be an intriguing proposition for the C-suite.
And that's only fuel payback. Sorry, Garrick. I keep talking over the poor guy. That's all right. That's all right.
Payback's a bitch.
But the carbon tax savings, but also just the ability to put in your quarterly report, we're doing this thing right now. and seeing savings
Yes.
right now. Anyway, I'm sorry, Garrick.
It is.
Say something.
No. I mean,
so now the pressure's on.
I know, and that. No, and that.
Stop, Garrett.
Yeah, no, and the problem was you answered all my questions. No, I to be honest, look, I was just going to say, I think the timing from your side is impeccable in terms of like you couldn't have done this because you're absolutely right. I think right now you're looking at airlines that are trying to justify keeping the last generation of airplane or the previous generation of airplane longer because it's more reliable. And but how do you do that when you have, especially if you're a public company, you've got basically the criticism that's saying, well, yeah, but why aren't you taking on more new airplanes that reduce carbon, reduce everything else? So this is a way of saying, look, we are going to keep these airplanes longer, but we have the ability to make it more efficient, reduce carbon, right? So we are doing one more step, and that's kind of the best way to justify a product like that because they need to. It's not that they have a lot of choices of like, oh, we could just take more new airplanes. They can't really take more new airplanes, but they still need to justify we're going to keep the old ones a little bit longer.
Right.
Yeah,
and for a variety of reasons, they are behind on their sustainability targets, right? So this helps to offset a little bit of that space.
Yeah, Chris, I've told you this before, but I think your perspective is, I don't want to say unique because there are a lot of really cool people who have some really unique perspectives, but it's needed. And what I'm thinking of specifically is the way that you looked at kind of what's coming next on the aircraft side, but from what matters to airlines. And right now, that's get me my airplane and make it work like you said it was going to. That is the number one differentiator right now.
Yeah.
If you were to, so that's that ground level conversation, like when you show up and you're sorting boxes or you're, this is the real airline's pain point, which is different than if you ask airlines, what do you want to come next? That's a different answer. And when you focus on that question, like, what do you want to come next? If you don't have that next thing on the drawing board, people start to freak out. But that's not actually the pain point right now. We're dealing with what just came next. The reliability is not there. The production rates are really where we can differentiate. And that dovetails just, I think, wonderfully into it's that I call it kind of the real knowledge, like the real deep understanding of even to the operational level of where this industry is going. And again, it sometimes ends in really, and I do say this with all due respect, because I do think it's incredibly exciting, but it ends in some really boring places. I also say boring and responsible, right? Like these are hand in hand. And it's that level of kind of perspective and understanding that ends at these, let's do what we can do, right? Here's something that we can do. Like let's do this now. It needs to be around for a long time.
So maybe that's, you just got the title slide for my presentation. Boring but relevant.
Not even relevant.
Yeah.
Kick ass.
Not even
right? Yeah. Look, yes, definitely relevant. But you're not going strong enough there, Chris.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's funny because what it comes down to is everybody talks about, net zero by 2050 or what, I think it's 2050. Yeah. But it's really, it's not about, how do we get to net zero by 2050? It's what do we do every year to get to
absolutely
right, and those are the things that get you there, because it's not we're going to come up with a whole new product that has no emissions whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when is that going to be, right? And I think you raised a great point before about everybody's looking at all these different structures that are going to potentially be the next generation of airplane, but I don't foresee Airbus building one structure and Boeing building a completely different looking structure, because ultimately for airports, airlines, they're going to be like, no, that's a logistic nightmare. I'm not dealing with that. So you guys need to talk and figure it out. And once you figure out this is the best, ultimately next fuselage that we can build, then we'll look at it, and then you can figure out what are the nuances between you and them. Right. But that to me I think that's going to just push things out. I mean, people talk about the next generation of airplane being in the 2030s. Based on that alone, I don't think so. I think there is another iteration of, hey, we've made some improvements through, I don't know, whether it's through kind of the hybrid type structure that, provides a bit more, but I think it just kind of pushes out further, because I think at the end of the day, we all need to come to an agreement of what does the next aviation infrastructure look like.
Right. And so the path to 2050 is a little bit like a 401k program. If you start investing when you've got more money, which is later on, so now you've got SAF, and SAF comes in 2035 and beyond in a relevant volume. The likelihood is, if you wait until then, until it becomes, if that is your main contributor within that space, because you don't have an entirely new aircraft design that really will be the step change by 2035, savings have to start today, which is you've got to accumulate savings from day one, not waiting for new aircraft to deliver or waiting for a entirely new design to deliver and infrastructure to catch up. It's what are you doing today, which is exactly what you said, Garrick. It has to happen now. And people are in that space doing boring things, but it's cumulative. It doesn't necessarily compound the same way as 401ks do, but it starts to make a meaningful contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions while we're trying to figure everything else out.
Yeah, and the whole action versus hype thing, I think separating that out is also really important. And I'll throw the eVTOL space in this as well, because understanding what we're talking about here is net zero by 2050. Mm-hmm. What does the eVTOL space get us in that goal? It doesn't mean that there aren't other objectives, but they don't, but for very rare exceptions, they don't replace airplanes. They replace cars. And what's better at replacing internal combustion engines and cars than eVTOLs? It's electric cars from a pure sustainability standpoint. And that's not to say that there aren't reasons to be excited about a lot of these new technologies. It's just to separate the hype from the things that can happen. And I say this in the context of Aero Design Labs and what you're doing, kind of from that boring angle, is that there's really no hype behind this. But that, I mean, as I alluded to, that really interests me. Like, I'm really interested in looking where people aren't looking, where these, I think there's a great example of how to look at this market and what benefits you can achieve today. And I'm also really interested in why people aren't interested in this. I think there's a whole other kind of study there on and what draws our attention, how those rise and fall. But to your 401k example, look, FTX, I'm all in. It's great.
NFTs.
I don't need these. I don't need these bite-sized, growth every year. I haven't looked at my account. I don't even need to. It just It just keeps going up, baby.
I'm not selling crypto.
Yeah,
it's not my space. I'm the steady Eddie money market account.
Yeah, dividends. Well, that's what it is, actually. I mean, right. Yeah. You put money towards something that has a payback, a fuel only. Like, you're not giving yourself enough credit, and not to butter up the guest, but a fuel only, like, it pays itself back in fuel costs. You're not even touching carbon. You're not even touching sustainability costs, the impact to the environment, the impact to shareholders and the ESG space and all that. It's just, it pays itself back in 3 years.
Yeah. Less.
Yeah.
3 years
less
and
than 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all network dependent, right? And stage length and so forth. But I'm confident under 3 years payback.
Yeah. I think what I love about what you guys do is the idea that you're not trying to you're not saying that ultimately the OEMs didn't do their best job. You're just saying that based on when they did it, they didn't have the technology that you have today to figure out how you can do it better, right? And I think
Yes.
that should be looked at for a variety of products, right? I mean, yeah, you're right. There's some things that, it's kind of like, well, if it ain't broke, right, don't fix it. And so we just
Yeah.
kept selling it. But based on what we can do today, let's figure out how we can do it better, because it's still, on the narrow body side, right? You've got ultimately over 10,000 airplanes that are out there. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a lot of airplanes. How do you make those better so that ultimately because they're still going to be flying. So how do you make those better, right? And I think that's where you guys come in, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and we're complementing the OEMs. We're not stealing any space from them, and so we all can coexist in that space. What's interesting about what we're doing at ADL is the software that we have that helps us build and iterate designs on various matters involving not only airflow but fluid dynamics as well. Software that is using artificial intelligence now as well that helps us to build a mesh of a shape and model out the fluid dynamics much quicker than you could before, which means you're able to turn iterations much quicker and see what the impact is of a different shape on the as it impacts airflow or fluid dynamics. And we can scan anything that moves. So you can do a truck, a boat, you can do it with air conditioning, anything that is impacted with airflow that you want to improve the efficiency of. Our software can turn that much quicker than the technology that is out there today. And so that's a really exciting avenue that we're sort of tangentially looking at to the existing applications, is where else can we apply this software that allows people to iterate designs much quicker. And tell me an OEM or in the aerospace world, or even in shipbuilding, or people who are doing wind generators, anyone that would look to optimize and do that more quickly. I think our software actually is a very interesting area that we're exploring that has massive growth potential. And I don't think we realized that when we first started this, but now we realize what AI brings to that whole mesh process, and accurately and in incredible detail modeling out and seeing in a very granular format various aspects of a shape. That is a really intriguing space, and we're really excited about that. And that's a different group that I'm responsible for, because you want to keep me focused on aircraft, and I think I've limited my area of aerodynamic knowledge and shapes and airflow and things. But there's a lot of space to be explored with our software too.
I think there's there's another way to kind of look at your point, Garrick, on that the OEMs didn't have this information available to them back then. Yes, but they do now, right? Like I'm sure ADL would be very happy to go and sit with the OEMs and be like, yeah, here, look at this, compensate us for that. But there's another reason that these optimizations are available. Like you can get 2 points on an aircraft fuel burn because it's not super optimal, because manufacturing does matter. The ease of manufacturing, the ability to mass produce this aircraft. I mean, it kind of gets back to what you were first talking about, that there's that trade-off to everything. So for the OEMs to go back in and say redesign and build these things, it affects their production process, which, by the way, right now isn't so hot. I mean, it's not exactly humming along. So you have somebody that can come in and be like, hey, look, that out of production stuff, this isn't even touching a production line other than your own. We can get the benefit on the stuff that's already been designed, built, and out the door. These are 30-year assets, 40 up to 40 if it's a freighter aircraft. If they're 10 years old now, here's another 3 decades of benefit that we're not even thinking of, because we're only thinking of developing the new aircraft from say 2035, 2040 onward. Anyway, I like that.
Yeah, it's the upgrades and retrofit departments in the OEMs that can look to enhance the value of the in-service fleet, and companies like us are able to enter that space unconstrained. So there's nothing proprietary about what we do. We build a 3D model by scanning an aircraft in a hangar. Anyone can do that. And so we're working with those shapes with this new technology, and we're able to assess and analyze so much quicker than what an OEM can do, because we're not constrained by the thinking or the structural or the infrastructure and sort of the structural way that companies are set up, like Airbus and Boeing. That there are multiple silos that you have to work across to get an enhancement certified within an OEM. We can do it much quicker because we're solely focused on that opportunity without having to think about how this impacts all of the other departments that are involved in this. And so we can move much quicker. And I think OEMs should be, they should see that as an opportunity for them to enhance the asset value.
Yeah. So I one of the things that kind of came up, and I apologize for the background noise. Of course, my landscapers are here. But with the big fans, that's right next to my window. It's awesome.
Yeah, my landscapers are here too.
Yeah. All right, Courtney. We'll see you later. No, but what one of the things that actually kind of struck me this week, looking at kind of the Dubai Air Show, like orders and looking at the backlogs and everything else. And it kind of resonates in kind of looking at that, going, the smaller operators really are going to be affected by their inability to not only get new airplanes, but in today's environment, even getting used airplanes is a challenge. I mean, yeah. I've heard over and over again that, as a smaller operator, if you're trying to go to the lessors to find lift, if you don't have a relationship and you're trying to find an A320 or a 737-800, good luck.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't happen. Yeah. Now that will change, obviously, over time. And I think that's where the things that you guys are doing help with that. So ultimately, it does go back to the bigger picture. And that's my point, is that ultimately you're not just kind of pushing, the older assets that are less efficient to the smaller operators that can't put an order in because they can't get their airplane for 10 years, right? Yeah. And so that it just kind of keeps the environment flowing and the efficiencies like getting better with everything, which is, I think that's the big benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old supply and demand rule, right? And pre-COVID, the OEM backlogs were very strong. And now what's happened is, with the lower production rates, you've squeezed that sausage and things are just going to be delivering further and further out, which means your ability to get a new aircraft in a space that you thought was previously available, so you had something in, say, the 2028, 2029 timeframe, that's just fulfilling now demand that was earlier, 2 years earlier, is now being pushed out to 29. So it just means you're going to have to wait longer to get hold of a new aircraft. So the trading of good used aircraft, I see that remaining strong for a period of time, and it's certainly had a boost from COVID, as unfortunate as it is, and people are now investing in assets because A, it's capacity, and B, it's reliable capacity too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know, so we're using up a lot of your time, but I can't go through this podcast without asking the question, current position aside, because I think that would be unfair. Where through your career, which we didn't even make it past, so Airbus, then you went to Bombardier, then Airbus, and then ADL, right? So yep. ADL aside, what did you enjoy the most, or where did you kind of find the most impact, or what do you think of most? Was it kind of that British Airways, where everything came from? Is it kind of your work at Airbus? I'm just kind of curious where you kind of found the most enjoyment.
And he really wants you to say Bombardier.
No, I don't actually.
It's a leading question, isn't it, Garrett? You got...
No, I don't want you to say Bombardier. I just want you to say whenever I was hanging out with you, Courtney. That's really all I was looking for.
Actually, that's exactly right. That's what he's trying to get to. My favorite time was when I worked with you.
That's right. It was the first time that the planets aligned in my life, and I felt balance was when I found Courtney.
Wow. Oh, I'm never going to hear the end of it now.
Can you say that slower and directly into the microphone?
I know. So that question, Courtney, is a little bit like asking me what my favorite music is, because there's been there's different chapters in my life that I think have had different levels of excitement and satisfaction. I think the common theme through every company I've worked for is I've been fortunate enough to have worked with great people who are like-minded. I think this industry is somewhat unique. I may be naive in saying that, but I think the level of passion that flows in this industry is extraordinary. And you just have to show up to any industry event, and people, it's a lot of people's lives. They're wrapped up in this sort of this draw and the allure of this industry. It's in our blood, and I've worked with a lot of very passionate people, and I've loved that. And I've also worked with, in each chapter of my career, I've been fortunate to have some really powerful mentors that I've been able to look up to and try and emulate, and had the benefit of their investment in me, in being able to help develop me as an analyst, as a salesperson, as a head of sales, as a head of commercial. And I've been able to grow with the benefit of people that have worked for me and people who have mentored me as well. The course of my career in aerospace has ebbed from regional space to large OEM, and then back a little bit into the regional space with Bombardier. And I will say, the time that I spent in Bombardier, and this is not because Courtney's here, this is just real genuine, heartfelt stuff. The going to Bombardier reminded me and grounded me in a lot of ways to what I'd learned at British Aerospace, which was you're the upstart here, which means you have to create, you have to think differently, you have to find ways to deliver value that is not already delivered by Airbus and Boeing, who have been in this space for a long period of time. And you have to deploy tactics that will differentiate you to the way that Airbus and Boeing go about their campaigns. And so, to a large extent, we were creating rather than just selling, and coming up with new ways and new arguments that resonated with customers, and showing new levels of flexibility and willingness to listen and to iterate and to enhance. And working with people like one of the people in my career who has had one of the biggest impressions on me is Rob Dewar, who at Bombardier was an engineer who you could put on the front line with a customer, because he spoke with such passion and integrity about the program and about the industry, and was able to attach himself to customer value and then deliver it too. And he would take responsibility for delivering value from an engineering standpoint, which is slightly different than working with the larger OEMs, when you're typically fighting with the head of engineering to see perhaps a quicker path to enhance the product, or to go that little extra mile. It felt as though we were less constrained in Bombardier, and more nimble too. I mean, there's definitely quicker decision making, quicker time to react to customer requests, and it had a different tempo, where it was a little bit of the Band of Brothers, which is okay. We're in this. Let's go take the big guys on, and had a lot of fun doing that. But going back to Airbus was great too, and being in a more senior leadership position there, and having the ability to be a coach as much as a leader, and deal with that coaching role in a very challenging environment called COVID, when we were expecting people to work in different ways. We were asking for people to operate in a crisis at a time when they were home with their families and their families weren't going anywhere. No one was traveling, and the whole world changed. And as a leader, reorienting my focus not only on we need you to perform and deliver, but you need to care about yourself too. You need to think about your well-being and how you show up in your personal life, and making sure that there's space to balance work and life. And that's something that I really have gravitated to. And I think my journey with cancer also gave me sort of the personal insight to making sure that there is balance in my life and other people's lives. But people will work hard in this industry because they're passionate about it. But you want people to live a full life too, and you want them to live, to enjoy the things that this industry can bring. And as a coach now, and as a mentor to some people, I try and instill that in them, which is, life's a one-shot deal here. So work hard and enjoy what you're doing, and enjoy the space that you're in. I find that very rewarding and fulfilling to be able to help people with those aspects, because this industry is just fabulous to be in, and I love identifying people's strengths and their beliefs as well, and trying to help them be a more confident person in their ability and watch them grow. There's nothing more rewarding than watching people grow and become stronger leaders and enjoy this career that I've been lucky to have. I like to pass on as much as I can, because I've had great people that have helped me.
So you're not the first person to say that, right? And I say that because I hear that from people all the time, and I'm like, I don't think you know what you're saying, like, because you don't act that way. But like for anybody who doesn't know Chris Jones, you need to just hang out with him. Like, just get a cup of coffee, get a drink, hang out for an hour, because what he just said, and I say this from a personal level, because I consider you one of my mentors, and the just on the the what you said about like coaching and life and all of that. I think people could easily write that off. So hang out with Chris. That's lesson number one. But what I did want to say, that the question that I was really angling for wasn't about Bombardier. What I really want to know is, how come there are all these people that came out of British Aerospace? There was like this class of people that just came out. Like, you don't know them necessarily as British Aerospace, but you were all kind of in the same place at the same time. How'd you pull that off?
I know people have referred to us as the BAE Mafia, because we did kind of like all graduate. We graduated out of that class, and then we just sort of ended up being positioned in the industry. But there is an uncanny thread to that, where I've been fortunate to come across other people in BAE that are in great positions, and so we must have done something right back then, because it is. I've observed that too, and I'm very proud to be part of that graduating class whenever we did graduate.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if it has to do with the, as you said, you guys had to fight for every campaign, right? You had to be creative and find the value in what you were doing, and that, right, as a learning experience, right? What else can you ask for, right? I mean, because it pushes you to figure out how to be the best you ultimately, to try to get that deal, to try to sell your product, to try to, so that, yeah. And it's you talk about people, and you go to events, and you talk to all these young people that are definitely passionate about aviation, and you just kind of, it's great to see, and you hope that they don't lose it, because it's just kind of like they go into it and they're like so excited, and you hope that there's nobody there to push them down, because they're, pushing them to work 20-hour days or what, right? That just kind of makes them go, you know what, I'm done with this, right? Because it's kind of like that. You're right, that passion that we have in all of our guests that we talk to, right? And it's just, that's what makes it tremendous. That's why I love this industry, is because of that passion. And so, I think it's because of people like you that ultimately people that work for you or work with you see that passion, right? And they get excited about it. And so they get passionate. And so it's all great. It's all great. But we've obviously, it's been, we've taken way too much of your time today. But this has been tremendous. It's such a fun conversation to have with you and hearing about everything that you've done. I know. I didn't believe him. I really didn't.
He goes, he has a British accent. How interesting could he really be?
Courtney might just be right on one thing.
Yeah, don't tell him that. Don't tell him that. He might be right. Yeah, that's not a good thing. So, but look, we do appreciate it. That's why we decided to do Time on Wing, is because we wanted to talk to people that are passionate about what they do when it comes across. And so this is just fun for us. And so we appreciate it.
Thank you both. It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate the questions, the chance to share my thoughts. And I hope that people enjoy this podcast and keep doing what you're doing. I mean, just bringing people's personalities and industry passion to life, and you're enabling people to tap into to leaders who have had successful careers as you both have, and that's how we get this out, right? That's how we build the energy and enthusiasm for the next generation who are in the industry or looking to get into the industry. It's our job to pull people along and do it with encouragement and support, and allow them to flourish. That will continue to reinvent what we enjoy doing. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I shouldn't say this, especially when we're recording, but
yeah,
you were right. Oh, that hurts. Gosh, it's like this sharp pain right in my side.
I know.
What's that?
I could feel the pain.
Am I having a heart attack? Is it a panic attack? That's what it is. Oh.
That's what happens when you agree with me. Flying squirrel. You compare me to a flying squirrel and a nut?
Not a flying squirrel. A blind squirrel.
Oh, a blind.
You've heard that one, right? A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
Well, this is Time on Wing, right? So you could say that, flying squirrel a flying blind squirrel find a nut. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, flying squirrels are not that bright. Otherwise, they'd be financial squirrels.
They'd be.
Do you edit this?
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. Wait, I'm sorry. Garrick's on. Yes, I take hours.
Right.
Hours, Chris. I don't know what happened. Why you didn't just tuck tail and run when you realize how just totally screwed up I am, but you powered through it, right?
I just, after a while, when you get used to it, I mean, you say some decent stuff for once in a while, so it's worth it.
Flying squirrel.
Flying squirrel.